Good morning, everybody. We'd like to welcome you to our training and resource call this morning. We will be having Dr. Courtney Jarrett, who is the Director of Disability Services at Ball State University, present on support services for students in college who have disabilities. A couple housekeeping pieces of information. We do not send certificates at the end of the training call. Instead, you will get an email thanking you for attending. It will state today's date, the topic, and who the presenter was, and length of the presentation. So you can utilize that hopefully with your company for credit for your training hours. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead, Dr. Jarrett, and switch it over to you.
Okay.
And we are excited to hear your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you.
And we'll take questions at the end of Dr. Jarrett's presentation. So, try to write them down and hold on to them.
I'm getting the spinny thing for my slideshow, so just give me one sec here. It's Friday, so my technology doesn't want to work. There we go. All right, show my screen here. So I will try and buzz through my slides a little bit because I would love to have questions and discussion at the end. And I want to start off by saying that this is the example that I'm going to give from my experience at Ball State and how we do disability services here. Every single institution of higher education that I have been in contact with does disability services differently. So while things will be general and we'll still have things that you can think about when you think about disability services in higher ed, this is going to be very specific to how we do things at Ball State and specific to the population of students that I work with. All right, so here's what my office does. We determine the student's eligibility for services and meet with them and determine what their accommodations are going to be, and then make sure that those are reasonable and appropriate within the ADA and 504. We really try and balance what the civil rights of the person with the disability is while also protecting what our standards are here at Ball State and within higher education as a whole. Why I have a job, why my office exists. We are following those legal mandates that I just mentioned. Section 504 of the Rehab Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then those amendments that came in 2008. Here's my little humble brag for you. We have a really long tradition and history of being very accessible for students with disabilities. And just recently, we were named the #1 college for students with physical disabilities by College Magazine. And so we're really proud of that reputation. And I'm going to do my best to keep that going. Oh, we disappeared. There's my children. Hold on a sec. All right, technology. So here's the process here for receiving accommodations. The student will disclose their disability to us directly, or every new admitted student at Ball State receives a self-disclosure form with their admissions packet. And it's just a one-page document that says if you want to be registered as a student with a disability, sign here and send this back in. And so that starts our process. But most of the time, first semester freshmen will send that form in, but everybody else that's disclosing at their time at Ball State will just contact us and say, hey, I've got this disability, how do I get accommodations? Either is fine, and we talk to people from first semester freshman year to last semester senior year to grad students, doctoral students. There's no limit on when a person can come and disclose and get accommodations. So once they disclose, we ask for some sort of documentation of the disability. We really like to see what a diagnosis is and how that's specifically going to affect them in the classroom or in housing or with dining, depending on what the issue is. We do a bunch of information sessions at the beginning of the fall semester, and so we ask students to attend those based on their disability. And then once they do that, we sit down and have one-on-one meetings with each new student to get their accommodations in place. We have a lot of online-only students also, and so we'll Skype with them or talk to them on the phone or have meetings via email. But we have to have a conversation with them to put those accommodations in place. One of the things that I tell students when they get registered is that we're not going to do anything for you unless you ask us to. We really want them to be an integral part of the process and learn to be good self-advocates and speak for themselves. We create the accommodation letters to start that process for them to get the accommodations. We do one page with bullet points that the students will then hand over to the faculty. We print those off for students that are on campus if they want us to, or we save them as PDFs and send those to the faculty. So I apologize, I'm not good with the screen thing. All right. So after we do the letters for the students, we expect them to have a good conversation with each of their faculty about what those accommodations are, and then utilize the services as they need to. So there's a list of things they might be utilizing, whether it's note takers, interpreters, accessible textbooks, test accommodations is the big one. And then if they have issues, they should talk to us and we'll help them negotiate those problems if they arise. I always like to joke though at Ball State, 90% of the faculty here are super great. So I so very rarely deal with big issues when it comes to faculty putting accommodations in place. And I know I sound a little sarcastic there, but it's funny, I expected there to be more problems, honestly. Okay, so some examples of the accommodations. Students registered with us get priority registration to schedule for classes for each semester. We have a big population, as you'll see in a minute, of folks that have physical disabilities, and so we give those so that way they can schedule time to meet with attendant care or give them some ample time between classes to get around. It's also helpful for folks that take meds that may need some time to kick in, or they're just better at work in the afternoon than they are in the morning, or they need to get everything done first thing. So we give that to everybody. Test accommodations, like I mentioned, extended time, reduced distraction, reader scribes, things like that for exams. That's a big one. Braille or interpreters or CART, computer-assisted real-time transcription, a person that sits in class with a student with a hearing issue or a deaf student to provide a transcript of the class. We have some blind students that are chem majors, and so we hire lab assistants for them. Note takers for folks who are, physically unable to take their own set or could just use an extra copy if they've got a learning disability to sort of compare and contrast. Copies of stuff from classes or the ability to record lectures. I think I have a thing later on about smart pens, and I'll talk more about that if you're not familiar, because those are one of my favorite pieces of assistive technology to use myself. Books in different formats, accessible res halls rooms, and then I'll talk more about this later too, modification of attendance policies. We have a pretty high percentage of folks that have psychological disabilities or chronic health conditions, and so being flexible with attendance is another one of those things. So that's just a tidbit. Again, it depends on the student. That's why we meet one-on-one, so we can talk with them and look at their documentation and see what's going to be reasonable versus not. And so here's some things that are typically not on that list. Modifications of the exam. With folks in K through 12, sometimes it'll be on their IEP or 504 that they can use all of their notes or have an open book, or reduce multiple choice or change from multiple choice to essay or give an oral examination. Those are typically things that my office would not be involved in, because that's the faculty's determination as to whether they even give exams at all, or if they are, doing papers or projects or different things. So typically in higher education, modifying what the assignments look like in a course would not be something that would be reasonable. Grade amnesty, I get a lot of that with folks that really struggle with math, same for like course waivers. And for better or for worse, the students that are registered with my office as students with disabilities, they meet all of the same admissions requirements as students that have no disability. And so they are expected to meet those same requirements for the major or minor or college that they're in. And so we don't ever waive classes. There are expectations and a list of courses that each major has to complete. And so we work with them to find reasonable accommodations, but they're going to complete the same classes as everybody else. Okay, so I thought I'd break it down a little bit by category. First, deaf or folks who are hard of hearing. The folks that we work with, it's a spectrum of hearing issues. And so some may be completely deaf, or some may have some hearing, some may use cochlear implants, some may not. Some of the accommodations that folks in that category will use are the CART that I mentioned earlier, or sign language interpreters. We as a university prefer to have people come to campus and do that work. There are lots and lots of remote options for that, where students can log on to an iPad or a desktop and access someone remotely to do those, but we've just not had good luck with that, whether it be the technology or the microphone or the Wi-Fi or the internet connection. And so when at all possible, we have interpreters and CART providers come to campus and be physically present with those students. Lots of them use note takers and test accommodations. They also, we send out messages to their faculty about captions, so that if someone's showing something on YouTube or a documentary that's not been captioned, then we work with those faculty to make sure that that happens. Next up are my folks that are blind or have some sort of visual issue. Again, there's a very wide spectrum of folks that are totally blind or might use some sort of issue like glasses or contacts to see some. Again, with the examples of accommodations, readers, note takers, adaptive tech, we want people to be as independent as they possibly can. We have an adaptive computer technology lab, and so we will work with those folks to utilize tech. But sometimes just having a person next to you reading what's on the screen or describing what's in a lab or in a math class is better than what the technology can do. So we do that occasionally. Same for books in an accessible format. The lab that I just mentioned will do a lot of book conversion for a variety of students with disabilities, and then they can also convert things to Braille or large print if necessary. One of the cool things about our campus is we're sort of middle-sized. We're currently at about 22,000 students, and I serve over 1,000 students currently. 25, 30-ish of those folks would be in this category. And so one of the things that we do is there are shuttles that run all through campus that any student can utilize for free. They can also use the city buses for free, but we have partnered with transportation to do an on-demand shuttle, and that goes door to door anywhere on campus. And so especially for folks who are blind or visually impaired will have them have access to the shuttle where they can call and get picked up where they're living on campus to take them to a different place on campus. Give them a chance, especially at the beginning of the school year, to figure out where they're going to and how to get around. But then also, you know, in January when it's -40, then sometimes it's better to just go door to door and not have to walk a long distance. I wouldn't say that our campus is too huge. You learn McKinley Avenue, you pretty much learn the entire campus, but it's another service that we offer, and lots of students that are registered are eligible to ride that shuttle, not just blind students, but it's just another way to get around, especially, you know, there's construction all the time on our campus, also on many college campuses. And so if there's not good notice about that around for students, then they can utilize that shuttle to get around it as well. One of the other things listed down there at the bottom is orientation and mobility training, and lots of times the totally blind students will partner with O&M trainers when they move in the week before classes, or sometimes during that first month to get better acclimated. We also, as a university, partnered with a company called AIRA, AIRA, just for the first time this year. And it's an app that you can download, and it uses the camera on your smartphone to see where you're at and to describe your situation. So it'll look at building signs, it'll look at room numbers, it will describe, like, if you're at the corner of a street or what building you're near. We uploaded campus maps into there with descriptions. You can have it read books and notes and things to you as well, but it's a person on the other end who's looking out the camera of your smartphone. It's pretty cool. So sometimes we'll have students that use that to help navigate areas instead of hiring a trainer, but they're welcome to do either or both. Okay, next up are folks with mobility issues. As I mentioned before, you know, we did get a #1 ranking. We are known as a campus that's really physically accessible. We typically have more chair users on our campus than all the other state schools in Indiana combined. But we also have lots of other folks that might have difficulty getting around and use a scooter or a walker or a cane or different things like that. I just think when most people see mobility, they automatically think of chair users, and we do have a lot, but that's not just the whole number in that category. I've already mentioned shuttle and priority. Housing accommodations for my friends who are chair users or have mobility issues, those take a little time to put into place. We're doing that right now for all of my fall students that have requested those. And so luckily, we just have great friends in the housing office that we can work with. There are accessible rooms in every residence hall at Ball State. Some are just more accessible than others. We're lucky to have a residence hall that's centrally located to campus. It's right behind the library, and it has a dining facility inside it. And so a bunch of our accessible rooms are in that location. And I always recommend that students, particularly chair users, consider that as their first choice when they're making housing choices. But if they want to live elsewhere, they most certainly can. Not every residence hall has a dining facility in it, and some of them don't have rooms on the first floor. And so that becomes a little trickier when someone's making popcorn or burning cookies at 3 a.m. and there's a fire alarm. So like I said, again, we work really closely with the housing folks to get that stuff put into place, which is helpful. Already talked about testing accommodations, already talked about adaptive computer technology, which is amazing. And then note takers, sometimes the chair users will also have scribes if they don't have good use of their arms and hands, and technology is just, you know, not what they prefer. We also have a big chunk of students who have learning disabilities or ADHD. We categorize those two in the same category along with traumatic brain injury because they often use a lot of the same accommodations. So there's some things that we think about when we think about learning disabilities and attention deficit. And we really like to talk to these students to get an idea of, do you have a general diagnosis, or is it more specific to reading or writing? I just met with a student this morning it was very specific to math, and she's having difficulty passing a math class this semester. So that's why I think those conversations and meetings with students are really important, because it may have a lot of information in their documentation that's shared with us, but that they may not need everything that's listed in a 504 or an IEP, and they may need different things when they come to college and take college courses. So it's just as important in my mind to sit down and have a conversation with each student, not just look at their documentation and assume who they are on paper. So some typical accommodations for learning disabilities, ADHD, the testing accommodations. We have an amazing testing center on our campus for students registered with my office, where they can go into an individualized testing booth, pop some earplugs in, or turn on a white noise machine and have some reduced distractions, which is definitely way more reduced than any of the other testing labs on this campus. But that way they can also do extra time in case it's not a possibility for them in the classroom with their professor. We also, do note takers, which we've talked about a little bit. We'll hire somebody in the class to share notes with them. I joke that it's the best job on campus because I'm paying a student to go to a class they're already registered for. All they have to do is make a copy of the notes from that day to give to the student, or if they're doing them on Word or in some other format, they can just email each time. And then the Smart Pen that I mentioned before, these things are great if you've not heard of them before, made by a company called LiveScribe. And they write like regular pens, but they have a built-in recorder. And so you use some specialized paper, and while it's recording whatever's being said in class, if it's a lecture, there's also a tiny camera at the bottom, and it's taking pictures of what you're writing as it's recording. And so when it's done, you can stop the recording and then go back and tap on the page where you want to listen, and it will play back to you what was recorded at that point that you were writing. And so for people that don't struggle with the physical act of writing, I recommend this all of the time, because I want students to be as independent as possible and be able to, utilize things that are going to be really helpful. And I think Smart Pens are one of those things. When I did my dissertation, 2012, I recorded my interviews that I did with a Smart Pen, and it was life-changing. So fully recommend, if you're not familiar with those, to check them out. Some of them, LiveScribe is trying to get fancy, and they've attached a new one, their newest one, to an app that they have. But their standard original pen, the Echo pen, is my favorite. And then I mentioned before, we have the assistive technology lab, and so they'll convert things into accessible formats, including electronic formats or audio formats. We have a license here at Ball State with Kurzweil, a reading software, and so I highly encourage students with learning disabilities, ADHD, traumatic brain injuries to utilize that, because Kurzweil, when you pull it up, it's, you can have the software, and I apologize if I'm, saying things that you might already be aware of, but when you open up the software and you open a book in it, it looks just like an ebook, but there's a big play button at the top. And so if you hit that button, it starts reading the text to you, and you can turn on the tracking function. There's a highlighter, there's a dictionary, there's a thesaurus. My favorite part is that you can change the voice that reads to you. So when you hit that play button originally, it'll be a male or female voice, and it kind of sounds like Siri. but there are like 50 voices that you can play with. And so I have ours in the office set to a British lady that reads to me. And I love that because it's like J.K. Rowling is reading me boring work PDFs or some horrible document that I have to read that I don't want to. So like I said, I strongly encourage students to check that out. It also comes in an iPad app as well, which I really like. But yeah, sometimes that's helpful for students with those disabilities as well. All right, next up we have chronic health conditions. I've got a list there of some things. You name it, and we've got it. Most definitely diabetes and seizure disorders. Those are probably the two biggest ones, although we do deal with some folks that have severe allergies to different foods and things, and also asthma would fit into this category as well. Occasionally, what we'll do, sometimes it's just a housing accommodation or a dining accommodation. We have a nutritionist on campus that people with food allergies can work with. Everything is labeled. They have a website where all of the food that's being served that day on campus is up, so people can look and plan ahead, and they'll order specialized things from dining, and so that part's not too bad. For other folks where, you know, it's just going to be a challenge for them to make it to every single class for whatever the reason, and the same goes for folks with psych disabilities. We ask for flexibility with the attendance policy for the course, and so we keep it vague like that because, first of all, I feel like every single class at Ball State has a different attendance policy, which the departments and the faculty get to decide, so that's fine. But so what that means for the students that get a letter like that, though, is that the accommodation may be different for every class. So the example that I typically give is Ball State still has a physical education requirement for every single student, and so they have a really strict attendance policy of 3 absences that they give everyone. And if they get an accommodation letter from my office that asks for flexibility, then they add on 2 additional absences. And so that's the accommodation for that student. Some faculty don't care about attendance, and so they talk to them and work out, you know, making up the work and things like that. Others, there's just not a lot of room for flexibility. In those instances, I give like student teaching. The folks that are student teaching, you have to be there to do the teaching. And we also have an architecture program at this campus, and we call those students the ghost students because they never leave that building and they never see the sun. They're very pale. So in some instances, it's not reasonable for flexibility, and that's when we have to be a part of that conversation, the staff in my office with the student and the faculty, to determine what, if any, flexibility can be had. It's the same for if students are asking for like deadlines or extensions and things. We can sometimes put that on an accommodation letter, but it really depends on the situation. And we put flexibility with deadlines as that accommodation because we really have to have faculty input as to what the assignment is, when it's due, why it's due at that point, and is there any wiggle room for that? Okay, so that's the next category of folks. There's a list. I put the data up there to show how much this has grown in the last few years. I don't know if it's more people getting diagnosed and, seeking treatment. That very well could be, or if the stigma is just reducing, at least maybe on my campus it is, where folks just feel more comfortable sharing that they have a diagnosis with a psychological issue and asking for accommodations. But it's definitely been, as you can see with those numbers, a big gain as the years have gone by. So that's not a be all end all list of psych issues that get registered with us, but I will tell you that a majority of them are depression and anxiety. And so sometimes we'll do flexibility with attendance or the flexibility with deadlines that I mentioned, testing accommodations, especially if the anxiety is really related to exams and things like that. So it, again, just depends on the student. Last but not least, my friends that are on the autism spectrum, some of them, may be socially awkward or have difficulty communicating, and so we'll have conversations with them, because as I've mentioned multiple times, I want everybody to be a good self-advocate. So we'll help them figure out what that looks like for them. Lots of them will work best if they've got routines and schedules and things to follow. And then sometimes it's a lot of the social aspects, right? So they might have difficulty getting along with a roommate or making friends or sharing, talking to their faculty when they're having issues or communicating with staff in the residence halls and things like that. So, they might get note takers, they might do test accommodations. Sometimes I think it's helpful for folks on the spectrum if someone, a faculty person or a teaching assistant or a graduate assistant is giving out instructions in class. At the end of class, when everything's really rushed, we'll recommend that they also put those instructions or reminders in writing, whether it's to send out an email to the class, when class is over, or like a weekly email, and not just to the student on the spectrum, but to the whole class. I just think that's a good, like, universally designed model, but sometimes it's helpful. Particularly, so we'll get calls about students on the spectrum that are answering every question and being, confrontational in class. And we'll talk to the faculty about, do you have a policy about whether people should raise their hands or should only ask a certain amount of questions before other people get to speak or things like that. Typically that's good, just classroom, modification, but occasionally that does not work. And even conversations where the faculty have one-on-one with the student will not work. And so they'll get referred to our conduct office, which we try to avoid at all costs, but sometimes that happens. They just will have some difficulty fitting into what a classroom policy and behavior should look like. Okay, a couple things, as I mentioned at the very beginning, that everybody does this a little bit differently. So here's some highlights that I think are unique to Ball State and disability services and help us stand out a little bit. One of them is a faculty mentorship program. And so first-time freshmen that register with me at the beginning of their fall semester freshman year get an invite to participate in this program. And what happens is I send them a postcard and ask them to volunteer and have them let me know what their major is going to be or what they're interested in. And then I match them up with a faculty person in that major area. We like to joke, every single person working in my office right now was a history major. So if they are history majors, like, we're good, we're awesome. But if it's like a bio major or a math or even some sort of music, it's like, I'm interested, but I don't know what you're talking about. So we like to match them up with someone who has similar interests that they do. And so they can meet with them every other week, once a month. There's a Starbucks here on campus they can meet at. They can meet at the faculty person's office. They can talk about the program that they're in. They can, the faculty might introduce them to other faculty or other folks in the class. They'll talk to them about grad school or, careers for the future. They'll also introduce them to Muncie if they're not local. It's hard for everybody to come to college as a freshman. Sometimes it's harder if you've got a disability. So we offer that as a program for them to participate in. We've done tons of research with that program, and the folks that participate are retained at Ball State at a higher level than the freshmen that don't. So we strongly encourage that. I've got almost 70 freshmen participating this year, so that's pretty exciting. We also have a really great internship program that we partner with Eskenazi Health in Indianapolis to create paid internships for students with physical disabilities. And so that's another thing that we're passionate about, is we want them to be successful as Ball State students, but we also want them to graduate and go out and do work in the field that they're studying. And so we're trying to get rid of that stigma that hiring a person with a disability is a negative when it should be a positive, and we're getting those students some much needed experience for them to put on their resumes. And then we have some fun adaptive sports. We have a power soccer team, and we also have adaptive rec nights every week where they play wheelchair basketball in the rec center. I don't know if you've ever tried that before. It's real hard to try and shoot a basket and lean back and not fall out of a wheelchair. But any of you are welcome to come and visit on Wednesday nights if you want to. And then we also have a student group, Alliance for Disability Awareness. They're active throughout the year, but their main events are in March, which is Disability Awareness Month in Indiana. So they plan a whole big month of events every year, and that's really fun. That group is mainly students with disabilities, but it's not just only for them. So lots of folks that are friends with people with disabilities or that want to go into special education or applied behavioral analysis, other programs that are, specific to disability will join that group as well, which is fun. Okay, I'm almost to the end, I promise, if you've got questions and comments and things. So some of the issues and trends that I think will relate to many areas, not just Ball State. I mentioned the demographics and put up some signs for you there for the psych disabilities, but that's a growing number. I think we also have a growing number of students that are on the autism spectrum. And like I said, we always have a good number of folks with physical disabilities here. I'm on track to have the most chair users come as incoming freshmen that we've ever had in the fall. So that's sort of an interesting trend for us. Documenting disabilities, when I started in this field 10 years ago, we were really stringent in higher ed about documenting a disability, and you had to have a full psychological evaluation to get registered. And now, like I said at the beginning, I really want to see what your official diagnosis is and how that's going to affect you. And I want to have a good conversation with you as a student to figure out what the accommodations are going to look like. If students are asking for things that we would consider maybe unreasonable or unusual, then we might ask for more documentation, but we don't want to hinder people from coming to use accommodations to be successful here. Oh man, the next two are huge, okay? So lack of access for technology is, every YouTube video should have captions, and the captions should be readable and make sense. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. And every film that comes out, every documentary, every whatever it is that people want to use, even stuff that's created here at Ball State, holy moly, that stuff should be captioned and be good as well. And stuff that when people are using screen readers, that's, every image that comes out on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, like that should be described by Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Like we don't need to put alt text back on the person that posted it, and just a variety of those things. Those are the issues, like accessible textbooks and software that people are using in their classrooms. That's the kind of stuff that we're still working on. And then animals. We have lots of service animals on this campus and have for quite some time, which are dogs. We have yet to have a miniature horse. Those are the only two things that are listed in the Americans with Disabilities Act that you can have as a service animal. When we get a miniature horse, it's going to be great. But the other category of animals that are allowed as a part of a university are called emotional support animals. and they're a HUD regulation, housing and urban development. They are only allowed in our housing, in our residence halls and our university apartments. Students have to be approved for those, as they are for any other accommodation, through my office. And there has just been a big jump in the number of folks that that want to be registered to have an animal on campus. And so that, again, that's sort of at the top up there with the changing demographics. But as I mentioned, we have a lot of service animals. Those are highly trained and really specific to that person. And so we've had some issues with people having other animals in campus buildings and service animals being attacked, and it's just not a good look right now. So we're trying to keep those separate and keep those policies in place so that everybody gets the accommodation that they're meant to have, but everyone is also safe, animal or otherwise. Couple other things that I'll just mention. There's a really big emphasis in higher ed right now of people graduating in 4 years. And in the state of Indiana, there's specific emphasis on that, and then also with financial aid guidelines. And for many students with disabilities, that's hard. Even like as myself, a person without a disability, I had to take summer classes in order to graduate in 4 years. So that's a challenge. And some people don't get funding for summer classes or outside of 4 years. And sometimes a reduced course load is the best for a person's mental health or for their physical disability, and so those students should have that option and not get penalized, and so that's an ongoing issue for us, especially in this state. And then employment outcomes, that's a real big issue. I mentioned the internship program that we've partnered with for Eskenazi, but I don't know how many of you are aware of, those horrible statistics that people with disabilities nationally, the underemployment rate or unemployment rate is 80%. If they have a college degree, just a bachelor's degree, it's just 50%, but that's not any better. So while my focus is really on getting people accommodated while they're here at Ball State, we really want them to graduate and go out and do the work that they were wanting to do. And so that's why that internship program and other partnerships related to employment are really important. All right, I think I am all wrapped up here. So if we want to have some questions or anything like that, then I'm good for that.
Okay. So just a couple positive comments. The accessibility at Ball State's wonderful. I had a consumer enrolled there, and the transportation was great. She used a wheelchair. I'm so glad to see Ball State, where I graduated, is staying abreast of the needs for those with disabilities. The campus was great in this area when I was there, and it appears continuing the trend. Good info on new technology available. Then we had a question, the Kurzweil. How do you spell the reading service that you use for ADHD learning disabilities?
Sure. And it's named after the guy who created it. So he needed a better PR person because that's his last name. Kurzweil is Kurzweil.
Okay. And is there programs besides that one that you would recommend, or is that pretty much the main one that you would?
That's the one that we like the most. I will say that I know other students will use Read and Write Gold is another one that other universities also do licenses for instead of Kurzweil. Also, technology is really getting better, and so there's good stuff out there in like Microsoft Office and in Mac Apple programs. And so sometimes I was at a conference a few weeks ago and they were showing good stuff within those. So sometimes it helps to just go ahead and check out what they're using to see if the accessibility functions in like Word or Pages or something like that would work, because the screen reader is pretty good on Apple products. You just have to like get used to it. But Kurzweil has a lot of extra functions, and that's why we pay for it. And it's not cheap.
Okay. Because that was my
unfortunately.
next question is, like for, somebody who maybe isn't, maybe we have a student who's in high school that could benefit from that. Is that something that you could, would they be able to advocate to the school system to provide for them under like IEP and IDEA?
Probably, because you can buy, like what we do is we have a university site license, and so I'm sure they could do a high school site license, and we
Okay,
have the opportunity for 1,500 students to utilize it, and I think that was like $5,000. So I know that you can buy individual licenses. I don't know how expensive that is, but it
okay,
seems like if the school system wanted to purchase it and then dole out those licenses, that's sort of how we do it here.
okay. Um, is the Echo Pen, Smart Pen, something that is allowed in high schools as well? Do you know, for kids
Absolutely,
with,
because the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, clearly says that students, regardless of what age they are, should have the ability to record notes and lectures and
excellent.
things. So, yep.
Have you been able to communicate this information with Indiana high school special ed teachers, guidance counselors, and other administrators? And if so, how is that accomplished so that they're better preparing, those kids who might be looking at going on to college?
That's a good question. I try to go to as many transition fairs as are offered because I think that's a good way to hit not only people that are affiliated with the school, but parents and students. So I think that that's really helpful. But yeah, it just sort of depends. Like I think I have a good relationship with the folks that are sort of local to Muncie and Delaware County, but the most recent transition fairs that I've been to have been like Hamilton Southeastern and Avon and some of the Indy area. So it just sort of depends is the short answer, I guess.
Well, there's a big disability expo up here in Fort Wayne, May 5th, so you might want to think
Okay.
about that one. Every year is a really huge one that they hold at the Coliseum. I can send you some information on it if you'd like.
Oh, sure. That'd be great.
I'll send that to you.
Okay.
Does the university provide live scribe pens, or do the students need to buy those?
That is also a good question. So I have 20 of them that we have in the library and that we give permission for students to check out like a library book. And so that's really great because that way, if they lose it or it gets broken or something, they get fined by the library just like they would if they lost a book. And so I don't have to take care of that, which is nice. But I strongly encourage students that if they try it out for a semester or two, to buy their own so that way they can take it like when they graduate and things like that. Smart pens are actually really affordable. Those pens are by themselves like 50, 60 bucks, but if you go on Amazon and buy one, you can buy like the pen and like some ink refills and a pack of like 4 or 5 notebooks for like $100. So I strongly encourage students to get their own as much as they can, and I encourage them to have like vocational rehabilitation buy that for them as well.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Jarrett? Let me scan down here. The Elkhart Area Special Ed Co-op has a borrowing library for tech, including smart pens and the like, so that's good to hear.
Yeah, that is
But,
great.
do we have any other questions? Anything else you want to know? Anybody? We'll give everybody a minute or two. And Easter Seals Crossroad also does borrowing as well. They're a
Yeah,
great
they've got
resource.
lots of good stuff. Yeah, Easter Seals is great.
Okay. We'll give everybody a minute here. Somebody said, wonderful information, thank you. Yes, it was really great, very helpful. We're working, and now with Medicaid waiver, we're seeing a lot more individuals who are younger than we used to.
Sure.
and definitely seeing more, young adults that are looking towards, what's out there and possibly pursuing further education. So this is super helpful for us. Okay, I'll give everybody just a minute to see if any more comes in.
Well, and I'll mention all of my contact information's on the first slide. So if you think of something later and you want to call the office or shoot me an email, please feel free to do that.
And I will email the PowerPoint out to everybody who attended today so that you will have a copy of that as well. We also record our webinars and post them on our YouTube channel, which is advocacy links. So you can also find a copy of the recording once the webinar is over and I have a little bit of time to convert it over. You will also be able to find it there. So if you want to go back and reference it later, you would also have that opportunity. So right now I don't have any further questions, so we will let you go, Dr. Jarrett. Thank you so very much for your time this morning. Great information, wonderful resources, super helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, you have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
All right. And that is the end of the webinar, everyone. Thank you for attending.